if you were to go invent a carbon capture machine, you couldn't invent a better machine than a tree in terms of mitigation for climate change.
David Cleaves is climate change advisor for the U.S. Forestry Service. He says trees provide at least part of the solution to climate change.
First of all, trees capture carbon from the atmosphere, capture carbon dioxide, convert it to carbon in the tree, and store it there for hundreds of years. And even if a tree is turned into a wood product, that carbon remains stored there for many, many years, many decades, even hundreds of years more.
Cleaves admits his bias toward trees, but he's not alone. 5 years ago, the United Nations initiated a program at the Climate Change Conference for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, now called REDD+. One of the solutions being discussed is a pay-for-performance mechanism. The Forestry Service's Shira Yaffe explains.
Where countries will be paid for their efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their forest lands. And that's in the process of being negotiated, and that's really focused on developing countries.
South America and Africa have had the highest rate of deforestation, losing more than 7 million hectares of forest annually between 2000 and 2010. Such deforestation, says John Watkin of Conservation International, has ramifications well beyond its borders.
The Congo Basin is responsible for the rainfall that results in Lake Victoria receiving 70% of its water directly from rain onto it. Lake Victoria is the most thunderous area in the world. It's one of the sources of the Nile. Now, if the deforestation is extrapolated for the Congo Basin throughout DRC and the other countries, we will see a reduction in rainfall onto Lake Victoria, which will result in a reduction in rainfall onto the lake and the flow of the Nile out. That's going to have significant ramifications for all the countries north up towards the Mediterranean.
According to Conservation International, almost 60% of the world's forests are in developing countries. But 13 million hectares of forest are cleared each year for agriculture, ranching, logging, and mining. Efforts like Africa's Green Belt movement have helped improve deforestation rates with an emphasis on tree planting and sustainable farming. Other programs like the U.S. Forestry Service seek to put a value on trees. Matthew Edwardson is the Africa Program Coordinator with the U.S. Forestry Service.
In Central Africa, for example, we're working very closely in Gabon with the Gabonese government to basically help them inventory their national forest and really understand what they have. And that is the fundamental behind allowing for those countries to enter into these carbon market schemes which are being developed, because you have to know what you have before you can actually go forward and sell it.
Edwardson says the U.S. Forestry Service is working hard to adapt its forest management to a changing climate domestically as well as abroad.
And that's what we're also trying to help individuals understand in Africa is, given the increase in temperature in certain areas of the Albertine Rift area of Rwanda, Uganda, etc., what's going to happen to agricultural production systems? Will maize grow at a certain level? And if it will not grow there, where are people going to move? And how do you adapt the management of a protected area to understand those likely movements of people? So helping policy and decision makers better understand that.
So while deforestation affects climate change, a warmer climate, or a colder climate for that matter, affects the forest.
We know that the forests themselves, the ones that are here, are evolving and moving basically northward and up the slopes because the warmer temperatures and everything goes along with it are chasing them. Our fires have gone up to about double the rate. The insect and disease problems because of the drought-induced stress and the susceptibility to insect and disease damage has gone up by an order of 3 just in the last 15 years. So we have many more acres that have been disturbed that need to be rapidly regenerated.
Because of replanting efforts, the net loss of trees has slowed. Asia has actually increased its forest cover by more than 2 million hectares annually for the past 10 years. Nigeria has one of the worst deforestation rates in the world, but the UN Food and Agriculture Organization says it is Brazil that loses the most forest land each year, more than 2.5 million hectares annually. Rebecca Ward, VOA News.
Well into the second decade of the 21st century, the effects of climate change are being felt across the world. Economic activity and population growth have resulted in unprecedented concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and led to a warming of the Earth's temperature. Sea level is rising, ocean's acidity is increasing, and the changing climate is affecting natural and human systems on all continents. In 2009, Indonesia became the first developing country to announce a cut of greenhouse gas emissions. The biggest archipelago of the world realized its vulnerability to climate change and committed to reduce emissions by 26% by 2020, or 41% with international support. With almost 250 million people, Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous nation and one of the world's largest emitters of greenhouse gases. Converting the 16th largest economy of the world to clean technologies will be no easy task. Emissions are expected to increase further due to a growing population and an expanding economy highly dependent on fossil fuels. Its industry, transport, housing, and commerce sectors will require profound changes to become energy efficient. Since 2009, many policies, action plans, and commitments have been made. But how much is the government of Indonesia really spending on climate change mitigation? Is the money being spent in activities that can achieve the country's ambitious emissions reduction targets? For that purpose, the Indonesian Finance Ministry launched a budget tagging system to track financial flows to activities that mitigate climate change with the support of UNDP and UNEP. The Ministry of Finance aims at understanding whether activities that are currently being funded can achieve the emissions reduction targets. The system will put a tag and later will rate activities based on their contribution to reduce emissions. It is a way to identify how much budget has been allocated and how it has been spent, whether it contributed to reach the country's emission reduction target through development of financial incentives to produce policies, or for practical activities like reforestation, renewable energy, eco-efficient transportation, energy-efficient buildings, waste-to-energy, or restoration of degraded land. Indonesia is the first country of the world to have adopted such a tracking system. 7 ministries are legally required to put it in place by 2015. Spending the government's budget wisely and setting up the right incentives and disincentives is expected to encourage investors in technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Investors like Mr. Muhammad Badawi and Mr. Douglas Manurung. Mr. Muhammad Badawi's office is overcrowded with national and international trophies rewarding his pioneering entrepreneurial career. He proudly explains how he struggled to get his business started when he was only 27 and nobody believed in him. Today, he manages a plastic recycling network that operates from Papua New Guinea to Sumatra. He has supported entrepreneurs all over Indonesia to establish plastic recycling depots and equip them with his personally designed plastic grinding machine. He buys all their plastic pellets production and sells it to China.
Kegiatan ini berawal dari pemulung. Jadi nanti pemulung itu akan mengambil barang, dia keliling dari rumah ke rumah, dari tempat-tempat sampah. Kemudian pemulung ini akan storekan barangnya untuk dijual kepada bosnya, namanya depo. Kemudian di depo inilah akan mengirimkan barang-barangnya ke pabrik seperti kami. Kami akan membayar barang tersebut dengan harga yang lebih mahal, sehingga mereka mendapatkan keuntungan dari situ. Kemudian nanti di pabrik kami barulah diproses, kita pisahkan barang-barang tersebut menurut jenis dan warnanya dari plastik itu masing-masing. Itu akan bekerja ibu-ibu yang akan mengupas tutup botol dan labelnya dipisahkan sesuai jenis dan warnanya masing-masing. Kemudian dimasukkan ke dalam mesin penggiling untuk digiling plastik tersebut. Setelah menjadi cacahan, kemudian akan dicuci, dibersihkan, lalu kemudian ada proses untuk pengeringan. Dikeringkan barangnya, kemudian nanti setelah kering dimasukkan ke dalam karung. Sebagian barang ada yang kami buat menjadi barang-barang jadi seperti sapu, tetapi sebagian lagi berupa scraps kita akan ekspor ke China.
Plastic recycling reduces greenhouse gas emissions because producing new plastic from scratch would consume more energy than just recycling plastic. Mohammad started his factory with 2 employees. Today, he employs 50 people in Jakarta, and his plastic recycling network has created jobs for thousands of people.
Dan luar biasanya lagi, banyak orang yang bisa terlibat di sini, bisa bekerja, dan itu jelas memberikan kontribusi buat masyarakat.
Douglas Manarung is the managing director of TPST Bantar Gebang, a waste treatment facility that works in Bantar Gebang, the biggest landfill of Indonesia. The company receives 6,000 tons of waste every day from Jakarta province. They sort it out, convert organic waste into organic fertilizer, and convert plastic waste into plastic pellets that can be sold. Decomposing garbage releases methane into the atmosphere and has an impact on climate change 20 times worse than carbon dioxide. Douglas's company collects and treats the methane gas released by waste to produce electricity that is sent to the grid. The plant is generating 10 megawatts of electricity, and Douglas hopes to reach 26 megawatts. While projects like Majestic Bawana Group or TPST Bantar Gebang are doing extraordinary work to reduce emissions, it is eventually the government's incentives or disincentives that will allow them to fail or flourish. It is crucial for the government to identify the type of strategic activity that can create a friendly environment for public and private investments to succeed, and the tagging and scoring system can help to do so.